speaking of tax regimes that incentivize fair wages, the Prime Minister, Mr. Rishi Sunak, of PMQ's fame, of what we've just been watching, has released his tax return. Let's have a look at how much he actually paid in tax for the year 2021-2022. Right. So if we look here, I think I can get this right on screen properly. There you go. He paid. Actually, you're missing out. We'll do it from here. He paid £432,493 out of I think it's over £2 million of money that he's earned in that period, right? So his effective tax rate was just around about 22%. That's how much tax that he paid. And you'll see the vast majority of his income, so 1.6 million, came specifically from capital gains, right? So for those who don't know, capital gains is money that you pay from any profit that you make on buying or selling capital, for example. So what Rishi Sunak has is a blind management fund in the United States. So he has investments in a bunch of, I think it's believed, stocks and shares that gets bought and sold to be able to make him money that's managed blindly on his behalf. So he does not know what's in it, so he can't tell you what's in it. Someone else manages it for him, but he still reaps the rewards after they've taken their cut out of that. Okay? Now, I don't know if anybody knows, but that's not a job. That's not labour. That's not work. That isn't productive. That doesn't do anything. That does not contribute into society in the slightest, right? He's getting paid over £1 million every year before taxes, over £1.5 million, sorry, each year after taxes, from sitting around and having money. And it's not even invested in the UK either. So this is money that he just gets because he has existing money, and then he pays somebody else to turn it into more money. So Rishi Sunak does literally no work and gets paid millions for it. That's on top of obviously the salary that he gets paid in his second job, which is being Prime Minister, because he only gets paid 80k for being Prime Minister. Or actually, sorry, 150k. It's 80k for being a member of Parliament, and then 70k on top of that for being a minister as well. So he only gets 150k for being in this political position, which is really his second job. His main job is being a person who sits around counting money off the back of the fact that he has enough money to make more money out of his money. Now, people who've watched this channel will know that I have long been critical of the way that the tax system in this country is structured. We have a productivity crisis in this country, as has been pointed out in chat. We don't incentivize people going to work. One of the main reasons why you will tax something specifically, tax it more, whatever, is to try and disincentivize it. Commonly, no matter what you may think taxes are used for, taxes aren't really there to fund government spending. The government can spend any money it wants because it has a central bank. Taxation is used to control the money supply and to incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors. So if you tax something more, you will disincentivize it. If you tax it less, you will incentivize it. This is why we tax things like fuel heavily, why we tax things like cigarettes heavily, because we don't want people to use their cars and we don't want people to smoke cigarettes. So we tax them highly to be able to disincentivize people from doing so, which broadly works. So when we have a system where, let me have a look at this, let's compare what capital gains tax is an income tax rate. The basic rate of income tax is 20%. The basic rate of capital gains tax is 10%. And the high rate for income is 40%, and the low rate for CGT is 20%. So we are disincentivizing people actually having real jobs and incentivizing them doing nothing and contributing less than nothing to society. So this means when we are sitting on the back of no productivity gains over the past however many decades at this point, where productivity has been incredibly stagnant, and everyone's like, well, how do we get productivity up? Simple. Have a tax system that doesn't incentivize people to not fucking work. Sitting around and turning money into money is not work. You're not productive. That's not labor. That's not a job. That's just being rich and making yourself richer. And as Donnie Marco points out in chat, the capital gains that you make can then be reinvested into more capital and increase capital gains. And this is completely ignoring the way that we tax dividends even less. The dividends basic rate is only 8.75%. And that's, again, just money being turned into money. You don't do anything. You don't produce anything. You're unproductive. All that means is that you sit around and then your investments give you money for the fact that you've invested in them. Bilbo Baggins, this is just tax for himself. This does not include Akshata Murthy in what's happening here, right? So this is bananas taxation. This is absolutely bananas taxation to incentivize people to not be productive and then wax lyrical about how the productivity crisis that we have. And instead of making it more lucrative to go to work by reducing income tax and then increasing capital gains tax to disincentivize that, what instead we do is we try and force disabled people back into work by scrapping the work capability assessment and essentially just treating them like any other unemployed person, for example. So we demonise the benefit scroungers, because otherwise we might have to attack, Tory donors, which wouldn't really go down very well with the people who the Conservatives govern in part on behalf of, which is not you, dear friends. It's not you that these people govern for. So when you look at his effective tax rate after all of the different tax bands and different kinds of taxation is taken into account, 22% this man pays. 22% he pays on his income, right? Do you know how much a nurse pays on income tax? Rather, because they don't have any capital gains tax to be able to pay, right? A nurse is on their income tax pays 26%. He pays less tax than a nurse does, a lower rate of tax than a nurse, and he's a multimillionaire. No wonder they think that their neoliberalism model is great, works really well for them. They can't see past their own success despite the fact that it's likely to damage them in the economy long term. And these are the people with the power to change the system. The people with the power to change the system are the people who materially benefit from not changing the system, which is why it's never going to change. And of course, nurses will have student loans as well. For example, a graduate who earns over £50,000 a year pays an effective marginal tax rate of 52%. That's more than double the actual tax rate that Rishi spends. Obviously, the tax, that's not Rishi's marginal tax rate. That's Rishi's overall tax rate for everything, all of his taxation, right? But even then, the top rate of capital gains tax is nowhere near the top marginal tax rate that a graduate might pay. And these are supposed to be the people that we are trying to incentivize to be the high wage, high skill economy, productive workers of the future. We keep being told we're going to get a high wage, high skill economy. This is dependent on people being incentivized to go and get a degree and go and get a specialization, go and get a good job in an incredibly important industry, make ourselves have a speciality in some innovative new part of the economy that may stimulate us to be able to get ahead of our international competition, for example. But what's the fucking point? What is the point in getting a good graduate job when you're going to get taxed so much? You might as well just turn money into money and become a fucking broker. And you've got to remember that if you are someone who only makes their money out of capital gains, you don't pay national insurance either. National insurance is an additional payroll tax for people who are productive and who work. And this is fundamentally the difference between the bourgeois and the proletariat in society. Like, not only is the division of labour itself immoral because of the extraction of surplus labour value from workers to people who do not work and who get to decide what to do with the surplus of what is generated from the people who engage in actual productive labour, they also get taxed less. They get taxed less to do it as well. And again, this not. I mean, obviously, I believe that Tories are fundamentally bad people, for example, but this is just material interest. This is their material interests being played out. This is fundamental to capitalism as an economic system. It's fundamental that these things will happen because people will always play into what's profitable, what is specific to their own material interests, for example. And if your material interest is in keeping capital gains tax low, because that's you literally get taxed as the Prime Minister, why would you ever increase that? Why would you? Gary Stevenson was making the same point. It's exactly the same reason why there's no money for nurses, but there's plenty of quantitative easing to bail out pension funds, plenty of quantitative easing to bail out the banks, plenty of quantitative easing to push into financial markets to make it look like GDP is growing when people's wages are stagnant and we can't afford to fucking live. It's absolute nonsense. I hate it. To think that a nurse pays a higher rate of tax than the richest prime minister of all time Honestly, it beggars belief, and this should show you, right? Anyone who tries and tell you that there's the establishment is the metropolitan liberal elite, or the North London elite, or whatever it might be. No, the establishment is where the money goes and the way people make their money. For example, I hate to be a Marxist, but it all comes down to your relationship to the means of production every single time. And this is again a fundamental divide. This is fundamental to the division of labor within a capitalist society. The only way to get change is to make it in the interest of those in power. 100%. 100%, for example. And if you're watching, and if you are somebody who works for a job and you vote for the Conservative Party, why? What are you doing? You're putting people into power who do not share your material interests. And not only do they not share your material interests, the people who donate to their party don't share the material interests either. I'm not saying you have to vote for the Labour Party because it's clear they don't serve the unions who they should be materially serving at this point. So, tough fucking shit. But these people do not have your interests at heart. They just don't. If they did, they would change the tax system to make it fairer and better and more prosperous. Because you've got to remember, at the end of the day, if you're incentivizing people not to be productive, that's what is going to drive economic growth, which they keep telling us they want to be able to drive, yet they won't do the one thing to drive economic growth that is going to not benefit them and actually benefit the people who do the work and create the wealth of our civilization. The share of the amount of wealth that gets generated that goes to people who do the work and are productive is the lowest it's ever been in the history of this country since the dawn of capitalism. Fundamentally, we are the most unequal that we've ever been, and this is why we're looking at, in the wake of the latest budget, the biggest falling living standards for 70 fucking years. Because there is no incentive for anybody at the top of this system to change it. So there you go. I hope I have leftoid pilled a bunch of people watching this who think, oh, I think it's terrible that Sunak pays less in taxes than nurses, but, at least the Tories are hard on crime, and think that that's going to help you out. No. Think about your own material interests for once in your life. Blimey. I don't get why anyone becomes a teacher and nurse at this point. They both require a lot of education and you get paid shit. And that's the real issue. Like, again, I hate to have to quote Anna Soubry again, but even if you're a conservative, right, and you fundamentally believe in markets as a fundamental force for good and a fundamental force for, for extra utility, then you all know that if we're continually be unable to recruit teachers, which we are, if we're continually unable to recruit nurses, because we are, it's because you're not paying them enough. You're not paying them enough, and they can't afford to live. If more people are leaving than are joining, then the market is telling you that you need to raise your prices. You need to create the demand, because the supply isn't going to be there to meet it. They have made this country unlivable because the only thing that makes money is landlordism, and that requires scrabbling underclass who can just afford the rent for a bare minimum hovel. Well, that's the issue. It's always going to be rentier. It's the poison that is rentier capitalism. And people will say, "Oh, hang on, you'll own nothing and be happy," as some kind of World Economic Forum conspiracy theory. No, it's rentier capitalism. It's neoliberalism right now, right? The division where people are going to be continually accruing assets with their additional wealth because owning assets makes you more money than being productive. The people who have them will then keep them and drive up those prices to make that gap go even further. And that will only get fixed by wealth taxes. It will only get fixed by a fundamental change in the division of labour. And it will only get fixed by ensuring that it is more lucrative to actually work than it is to make money out of your own money. And that fundamentally is a thing that needs to change from the top down. And as Gary Stevenson said on his Downstream interview with Aaron Bastani, you have to gain control of the state. These things aren't going to happen if you ask nicely for them. You have to get control of the state. You have to wield the levers of power and use it for utilitarian gains against the people who do not serve your interests. It's as simple as that. I know that sounds very Leninist from Gary Stevenson there, I know, but he's completely correct. In any other country, there would have been a revolution. Well, look at the streets of France right now. There's no way of catching up either. Once someone is rich, they'll continually get richer. Well, exactly. Because I said the divisions are only getting wider, and that's why I have no confidence in Keir Starmer, because he doesn't properly understand the situation that we're in. He does not properly understand that unless he institutes wealth taxes, unless he changes the tax code for people who make money off of capital gains and dividends, the gap between the rich and poor will get wider, and living standards will continue to go down. That's the fundamental issue that's driving inequality and driving the cost of living crisis in this country, is the gigantic wealth gap between the rich and the poor. And he may change, the rate to which things are getting more unequal, but unless we get wealth taxes, unless we get a massive hike in capital gains tax, for example, that division is not going to get smaller. It may get wider slower, but if it continues getting wider, the same problems will continue to persist, and he'll lose in 2025, and he'll deserve to lose. But of course, Rachel Reeves doesn't want to be able to upset the people who potentially will be donating to them when the unions eventually disaffiliate, which I hope they will do, because they should disaffiliate from the Labour Party, because it's not a Labour Party anymore. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. So yeah, tax justice now. That's what I should say. Is what I'm saying. If you can, and only support MPs, only support candidates who are in support of wealth taxes, because without them, the country's fucked. There is one way, but involves pitchforks in Minecraft. True. But Keir Starmer is a tool of the establishment, and if he doesn't own buy-to-lets, the vast majority of his social media do. Well, Tony Blair does, and that's who he models his socio-economic philosophy on. So there you go, right? And actually, landlordism is one of the key things that's happened in the rate at which people have been able to make more money out of assets. Because not only do you make money from the continually appreciating price of the house that you buy as a landlord, you also make additional rentier income on top of that as well. So yeah, it's the outlook isn't great. It really isn't great. Let's watch a video about it from Sky News, and we'll see what they say. I think they got Dan Needle on to talk about it, who's a tax specialist, which is pretty good.
Yes, so Mr. Sunak initially promised that he would publish them if he became Prime Minister back during the heat of the Tory party leadership campaign against Liz Truss in the summer. Of course, he's now been Prime Minister for about 5 months and he's been repeatedly questioned about it. Now, finally today, the day when most of Westminster was thoroughly distracted by Boris Johnson's opinion.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. It's funny how he released his tax return. Just at the moment, everybody was busy watching Boris Johnson's Standards and Privileges Committee interrogation. Right? What a weird time to release your tax return, Rishi. Strange. The next election can happen is 2025. Is January 2025 there's the last one in the capital? It's likely to happen in August 2024.
Appearance before the Privileges Committee, he took his moment to publish this document. Now, it's not actually a full tax return as such. Nicola Sturgeon did publish her full HMRC document just last month. It's actually a summary of his income and the tax he's paid. I think the key takeaway really from it, as you might expect, really just underlines what a wealthy man the Prime Minister is. So in total, over that 3-year tax period, it shows that he earned nearly £5 million from a combination of his salary, his investments and capital gains as well. And over that period as well, he paid just over £1 million in tax. Now, one thing that has been highlighted is that last year, for example, he earned 1.6 million in gains, but paid 325,000.
That's interesting, Kegs, about wanting to sell your shares in a property company. I don't really mind if you're participating in the system and you want to change it. Like, I'm not going to bores meme you about this kind of stuff, Kegs. But the ways in which share dividend income, for example, and capital gains shows how broken capitalism is that there is an easier and better model, and that is cooperative ownership, where you can have the shares, but it's shares and stuff that you also already contribute labor to, right? You have cooperative ownership, whether it be a consumer cooperative or a workers cooperative. Then the dividends that you get paid out are ones that you're already contributing into. I'm a big fan of energy consumer co-ops. I think those are a really good plan. Like, you can have local solar arrays that are owned communally as a cooperative, and then you all get a share in the additional energy that is created by that cooperative that you're a part of. I think that's good, and this is a much better system than the than shareholder ownership, for example. Like, shareholder capitalism is the rot at the heart of everything at the end of the day.
£1,000 in tax. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's no suggestion of that. But what it is highlighting is that actually the rate of
Lefty co-op should buy the stock market into investor activism. True.
tax on capital gains is around 20%, so substantially lower what people would be paying on their salary. Now, it doesn't give us any information about the scale of the assets he holds. Some experts have suggested that given the level of investment income on the interest, perhaps he's holding around £7 million in interest, and we don't have a lot of detail about what those investments or those gains are. We're told that the majority of that income comes from a blind trust, which critics have argued means that effectively we don't know the detail of where that income is coming from anyway. Now, it's also interesting that it's highlighted in the notes that come with this document that the Prime Minister has always been domiciled in the UK for tax purposes, despite the time he spent living in California, which of course is in contrast to his wife, who was born in India. And if you remember, the
Okay. If it owns residential lets, then yes, you should definitely sell those shares. That's the one thing, fair enough. If you're profiting off landlordism, okay, maybe I can understand why you want to get out of that, because I wouldn't want to knowingly contribute to that shit either. I'm losing faith in elections. There is no settling the point of precedence between a flea and a louse. Samuel Johnson, true. I mean, depends. Can you own enough shares in the company to be able to get majority share ownership and turn it into a housing cooperative? Unlikely, but I don't know. I don't think tax returns will hurt him politically. People in Britain have a weird worship of the wealthy and love being dominated by them. I think that's true, Bilbo Baggins, but I also think that a bunch of people who would hate Rishi Sunak for being rich already hate him for being rich. He didn't need to publish his tax return for them to hate him, rightly so. Right? He got damaged more by saying that he would move money out of the deprived urban areas towards rich rural areas, for example. That hurt him more than what broadly the discussion about how rich he is.
whole focus on Mr. Sunak and his tax affairs really intensified last year when it was revealed that his wife, who is the daughter of an Indian.
Yeah, that sounds like the best thing to do with your shares. Yeah, actually sell the shares and then use that cash payout to use as a down payment on a mortgage, and then you get yourself an appreciating asset that is ethical, which the opposite of like literally opposite ethically to being making money out of landlordism. Being dominated by the rich and Eton set might just possibly be related to all the monarchy worship. Oh, we are a nation. We are absolutely 100% a nation of cucks. We're a nation of gigantic cuckolds to power and establishment. So much so that we will try and invent new establishments that don't have anything to do with the real establishment. For example, I remember Matt Goodwin published this insane book where he's saying the new establishment is basically celebrities with liberal viewpoints, for example, or charities who believe in gender equality and like trans rights, for example. It's very strange to want to redirect away from an entire class of people who make money in a different way than we do, who went to different schools than we do and went to Oxford and Cambridge, and who know all the people in the media and all the people in the political class and go to all the same parties, right? Like, if you look at the Spectator Garden Party and you think this isn't the elite, but Gary Lineker is, then you are fucking insane. But they will invent these things because they want to be angry at someone. They want to be angry at a theoretical, quote unquote establishment of people. But they don't want to possibly admit, even tacitly admit, that the people that they've been entirely cucked out to, the political people in power, are the people they've cucked out to. If they can invent somebody that they disagree with to get cucked out to, they can essentially teach themselves and train themselves to not blame themselves, for example. Because if you realised, after all this time, that the real establishment with the conservative politicians and the monarchs, for example, that you were worshipping this whole time, that'd be difficult to take and change your opinion. But it's very easy to say, well, actually, no, the elite is the woke people that I dislike, because then you don't have to confront the failings of your own ideology. The benefits of being stable housing are enormous. Well, 100%, yeah, absolutely. My mental health improved significantly when I was in a position where I owned my own house. Significantly. not just because I managed to be able to get a living space that was my living space and not somebody else's living space.
Billionaire and has a 0.93% stake in his company. Infosys actually wasn't paying tax on her worldwide income in the UK, despite being married to the then Chancellor. She then changed tack and said she would be paying tax on it, but that was a voluntary arrangement. So if you're non-dom, it means you don't have to pay tax. You just pay a £30,000 fee a year. It's also emerged that both of them had green cards until relatively recently as well, although this document says it hasn't affected Mr. Sunak's tax affairs. Why does this matter? Well, clearly it's a time of cost of living crisis. Labour often focus their attacks on the Prime Minister as being out of touch by really stressing how very wealthy that he is, and this certainly isn't going to change that position. Also, the very decision taken to release this information, long awaited, as you say, does appear deeply cynical. The Liberal Democrats say it was deliberately designed to release it while everyone was distracted by Boris Johnson's appearance before the.
Owning your own house is good. It means you're not at the behest of a rental company. You can usually casually change your fees. I mean, you're at the behest of a bank as well, but at least you end up with an asset at the end of it. Better to get on the market than have others dictate how to take advantage of you further. I used to think the rental housing market was a good idea, but our rental market is just terrible. Well, the real answer is that if you want rentals, they should be from the state, through council housing or through housing associations, or they should be cooperative, right? There is no reason for landlords to there's no reason for any amount of private rental income anywhere at all ever. There is no need for it. It is completely unjustifiable, and not just in utilitarian sense from a leftist perspective, but on an economic sense, right? If you want a productive economy, giving people the opportunity to be able to make a living out of being unproductive is bad for your economy. It's bad for everybody. For example, there's no reason for Uber to swipe 25% off the top of every single fare they charge for just owning some service. That's literally all. They own service, they get to take 25%. OnlyFans, they own service, and they get to take 20% of everybody else's revenue. There is no reason for this to be private rentier income. This should be cooperative rentier income, where the cut gets taken, put into a pool, and then handed back out to everybody based on their contribution after all the overheads have been paid. There is no reason for the people who just own stuff and have the infrastructure set up there to take a cut out of people's earnings in that way. How do I feel about holiday lets? I think holiday lets probably are the exception to that, as far as I'm concerned. I think holiday lets and car rental, but when it comes to housing rental, it should always be cooperatively owned. It's skimming off the top of someone else's wage and then getting a new property at the end of it. Yeah, it's unjustifiable, completely unjustifiable. I got lucky in becoming homeless nearly 20 years ago, so I've been in social housing in the same flat since then. So much of my recovery and transition wouldn't have been possible if I'd been moving every 6 to 12 months. Were you in a guaranteed long-term social housing rental? Because those are really, really good. I used to illegally sublet in Minecraft out of someone who had a guaranteed social housing tenancy back in Manchester. It was a good arrangement. I didn't pay very much in rent at that point. What's interesting as well is that Dan Needle was the guy who was investigated Nadeem Sahawi's taxation affairs. He's had a discussion on this on Sky News, only a short clip, but probably worth watching.
Clever.
Thought he earned 4.766 million across 3 years, an overall effective tax rate of 22%. I'm sure I pay more tax than that.
You probably pay at least twice as much as that. And it's not because he's done anything very clever or because he's avoiding tax. It's because in this country, we tax employment income at up to 47%, but capital gains on investments at only 20%. That's why his effective rate is so low. Whether that is a fair result, whether the law should be like that, is a very, very good question. And weirdly, Mr. Sunak benefits.
It is indeed a very good question, and the answer is yes, it is unfair.
From that low rate is also the man who has the power to change it.
Oh, I see what you did there. Good place to leave it. Dan Needle, thought.
I mean, people. The thing is, what's crazy is people when you put it in blank terms to people, blanket terms, people understand that it's all about material interests, right? People understand that it's all about what people are materially interested in doing and what benefits them. Then they will follow these material interests, for example. Everyone knows it. Everyone can see it. Everyone understands that on a kind of base level. Yet when you try and explain to that in kind of macro terms, they will just feign complete ignorance. It's infuriating. Absolutely infuriating. Holiday lets have hollowed out communities in Cornwall and Wales and made people who grew up in communities unable to find accommodation sole, let alone affordable accommodation. Well, that's the Airbnb effect, isn't it? Where it's far more lucrative to do short-term holiday rentals on Airbnb than it is to have these houses available for purchase for owner-occupiers for a residential setting. It's nonsense. It makes no sense at all. And actually, it turns out, looking here as well, turns out Sir Keith Starmer has also released his tax return, so we can catch up on that as well. Isn't that fun?
Total tax paid for Sir Keir Starmer for the tax period 2021 to 22 was just over £67,000. It shows that he made a capital gains contribution of £85,466 in that.
See, literally, we have both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition making more money in capital gains than they do as their own income as a Member of Parliament. And you expect anything to change in this fucking system without a vanguard party? Sorry to channel the spirit of fucking Vladimir Lenin, but unless you properly have a party that is run by and run for the interests of people who don't make money in this way, the system will never fucking change. It will never change. It just won't.
Financial year on which he paid £23,930 in capital gains tax. It said that the sum reflected his share of the capital gains when his sister decided to sell a house that he had helped her buy. This was on top of his £126,154 a year income for being an MP and leader of the opposition. So in the period 2021 to 22, that tax year, income tax, Sir Keir Starmer paid just over £43,000. He paid just over £23,000 in capital gains, and that brings a total of tax paid of just over £67,000. That's in comparison to the Prime Minister, who paid a total tax last year of £432,000 in that same period. Let's bring in our correspondent, Amanda Acas. I'll breathe a sigh of relief. Not great on tax and figures, but Amanda's been taking a look through. So that total tax paid in that year, just over £67,000.
I mean, to be fair to Keith, maybe if it's just him selling off a house, maybe in his previous tax years he's actually not made much capital gains tax, and maybe I jumped the gun there. To be fair, sorry, Keith. That insult then was one of the only insults I've had to retract there.
Which may or may not have been expected. But what's the reason for Sir Keir releasing this? Remind us.
Yes, so Sir Keir promised in January that he would release his tax returns along with the deputy Labour leader and the Labour Chancellor if they win the next general election. But now Rishi Sunak has released his tax returns, well, a summary of them.
And the other thing as well is that if you already know, not only do you know that the government is full of people who own lots of property, and you already know that the current policies that they've been doing are specifically there to benefit other people who also own lots of property and assets, and you also know that they cannot let house prices drop because it would put regular people into negative equity who just own a single house, you know that investing in more property to drive the prices up is always going to be a safe investment, because there's going to be no chance any government ever would make property prices drop at all whatsoever. So you know that you can just spend infinite amounts of cash buying up huge amounts of property, knowing that you will always make a profit. There's no risk at all on spending all of your income on property and making money off of the existing property too. So why would you not spend all that money just throwing it at Airbnbs in the centre of cities, throwing it at holiday homes in the Lake District, for example, because you know that you're always going to make positive returns. With these holiday homes, you'll make positive returns even if no one ever fucking uses them, because you'll just make a profit over time as the price of the actual house itself increases. It's it's a completely fucking broken system. There's a really great video by Adam something talking about how the town centre of Prague is now all Airbnb. No one lives in the centre of Prague anymore. All of the ex-residential houses in Prague, the centre of Prague, are all short-term holiday lets now. It's so kind of it spreads like a fucking giant triffid. The problem we have is that in order to thrive in this economy, you need to own property and assets. People in power will be buying these to get successful, and then those that become MP will want to keep those investments due to the long-term success. Even the opposition have no reason to fix the system. 100%, Donny Marco, 100%. And not only do they fundamentally ensure that these assets continue increasing in value, they also ensure through tax policy that they are lucrative to invest in, as opposed to actually having a real job. It's completely broken. Completely broken.
Sir Keir Starmer's obviously decided that in the interest of transparency, he needs to release his equivalent information. Now, it's not actually, as we saw with the Prime Minister, it's not actually a formal tax return. Rather, it's a kind of summary of the income and tax paid altogether. And I think it is really quite striking, the comparison with the kind of amounts that we saw from the Prime Minister, who clearly is a very independently wealthy man. So, as you say there, Sir Keir Starmer paid £67,000 in tax. His total income was, in terms of his savings and the income he made from his salary as an MP and leader of the opposition, was a total of £126,621. Now, in terms of that comparison with the Prime Minister, well, his income from earnings and savings came in at just under double that, so £329,000. But the real difference is about the differentiation in the amount of capital gains.
Tax records should be public for all. I think all tax records of public servants should be in the public record. 100%, I agree. We need to promote squatting and local authority appropriation of empty properties. 100%. Absolutely, Edward. You're absolutely right.
Made by the Prime Minister. So last year, that was a figure of 1.6 million that he made in capital gains, whereas Sir Keir Starmer's equivalent figure was 85,000, which we do have an explanation on this from his accountant, saying that this is because he'd bought a house with his sister for her and her children to live in. So this reflects the share of the capital gains made when his sister decided to sell that property. So clearly it's still a lot of money, but in comparison with the total figure for the Prime Minister, it's obviously very different. So just to summarise again, the total tax paid by Sir Keir Starmer last year, £67,000, in comparison with more than £400,000 for the same period paid by Rishi Sunak, reflecting the very different amounts of capital gains made by the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister's investments were largely tied up in a trust, which is set up in America, because, of course, that's where much of his financial...
I think they've gone all through most of this, but the long and short of it is tax the fucking rich. Wealth taxes now equate dividends and capital gains tax with income tax. Reduce income tax, also do that. Because remember, income tax is increasing right now because of the budgetary constraints that we have under our neoliberal government. Income taxes are increasing. Right? They are freezing the bands and not raising them with inflation, which means that we will have fiscal drag. That means we are all paying more income tax at the moment. Income tax is not staying the same when the bands stay the same in the midst of an inflationary crisis. Right? Our taxes on our income are going up. We are getting taxed more on our income right now. So yeah, they need cutting, and dividends and capital gains taxes, they need to increase. That's what we need. And we also need to just tax wealth as well. We need a wealth tax too, to be able to actually fix the endemic wealth inequality in this country that will not be fixed just by tinkering around with other tax brackets. We need a new wealth tax to be able to properly redistribute in this country and get us back to where we need to be to make the country far more equal than it is now. Because at the moment we are the most unequal country in Europe, and all of the shit you've just seen today is entirely why.